No, everybody wants to enter that. USA wants to join Asia. Where is any role for USA in Asia? No, but we also want to be a player. So we are creating institutions out of a romantic idea that this group will serve some purpose. Maybe it will serve some purpose for some time. But probably we have to come out of this romantic approach. We have to be more pragmatic about our interests. What should ultimately guide us is whether a particular arrangement is in our interest or not. For example, we lead the BRICS Bank, but the money in BRICS Bank belongs to China. How does it help? We are the chairman. For some time, you will be happy. Okay, you are there in BRICS Bank. Neither money belongs to you, nor do you really control that money. So, there is a romantic approach for a very long time. Okay, be it there, let it be there. Whatever is useful there, we can take it. But what is needed today is a very pragmatic approach. That's why I quoted international relations is not about this whole romanticism of permanent friendships, permanent enmities, and all that. No, it's about just your interests. So we have to build relations based on the touchstone called whether it is in the interest of your country or not. Okay, while you do that, you also keep in mind that you are not harming anybody else while pursuing your own interests. Unlike Russia, it has its own interests at heart, but then it in the process harms other countries. We probably don't do that, but the central guiding force should be our interests. In the process, we decided that we have to put across this point that when we talk about our interests, there should not be these hyphenations. Hyphenations means, no, in my interest, it's my interest to build good relations with Obama today. Knowing full well that he refused me visa for 4 years. Fair enough, but still, it's in my interest. But then if I if I strengthen my relations with US, I should not be thinking, what will China think? This hyphenation, India, US versus China, India, China versus US. We have been victims of this hyphenation for a very long time. Everything to be seen from India, Pakistan prism. Everything to be seen from India, China prism. Why not India, India? India is India? No, so much so that the whole discussion in papers used to be that, Madam Clinton came to India, or for that matter, George Bush came to India, spent 3 days, but he only spent 4 hours in Islamabad, so it's a big diplomatic victory. Maybe it's a message, but how does it help us? The result is for President Obama to visit India, there was an invitation from Prime Minister of India. And President Obama would immediately agree, yes, I will go. But then pick up that hotline and call up Nawaz Sharif, don't think otherwise, okay? I'm just going bigger than poor fellow called me. Why should it be that way? So this whole hyphenation business should end in our international relations. India is a big power, an important power. And that's why when our Prime Minister met the President Obama, when we met President Obama in Washington DC last September, I request you, if you have not read that joint statement, request you to read it again. We have made our intentions very clear. We said India intends to emerge as a very strong and responsible global power. Our intentions are clear. You want to emerge as a global power. Okay. There is a superlative adjective. You want to be a responsible superpower. Nevertheless, you want to be a superpower. We are pursuing that objective, so don't hyphenate us with somebody in our neighborhood. So this may look ambitious, But Indian diplomacy has to be ambitious now. It cannot be docile. We need out-of-the-box approach. You know, it's very difficult to convince the establishment that we need out-of-the-box approach. I can give you our own experience in the last 6 months. Now, when Prime Minister was to take oath, it was decided that we should invite heads of all the neighboring countries. Now, among our neighboring countries, Myanmar is also there. Myanmar is not a member of SAARC. Afghanistan is. Afghanistan technically is our neighbor because the POK, Pak occupied Kashmir, in POK there is a, especially in Gilgit-Baltistan area, in the northern provinces, there is a 107-kilometer stretch, which is the direct border of India with Afghanistan. So, technically it's our neighbor, but it's a member of SAARC. Myanmar has close to 2,000 kilometers border with India, but not a member of SAARC. Now, when we decided to invite the neighbors, the question that was put to us was, SAARC neighbors or others? Now, if it is not the SAARC neighbors, what do you do with China? Should we invite them also? If it is SAARC neighbors, what do we do with Myanmar? Now, in all their wisdom, the foreign policy expert decided that there should be only SAARC neighbors. Fair enough, it's a decision. I don't criticize this decision as good or I'm not saying it is bad. But then, probably we should have invited Myanmar. We should not have excluded it. But then we don't want to go out of that box. We have certain set principles. We want to remain in that. I think we have to get out of that thing and we have to approach the foreign policy in a very out-of-the-box manner. And Prime Minister is very out-of-the-box man. He thinks on those lines. When he was to go for this G20 in Australia, the suggestion came that why not visit Fiji? Because Fiji had a new government and it was a government which was which is today generally considered pro-Indian origin people government. The Prime Minister's idea was, yes, I should go to Suva, Fiji. But why not meet the leaders of all those South Pacific island nations? There are 12 of them. The smallest of those nations has only 10,000 population. And much smaller than Manipur itself. Probably smaller than Manipur University. But with one vote in United Nations. There are 12 countries. Now the moment it was decided that yes, why not attempt it? The challenge came because the moment it was announced that they are attempting something like that, China also decided to hold a meeting of the South Pacific Island nations. No, but we started with a big advantage, which we knew. The advantage was, out of these 12 nations, 4 are those which recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. So while we start with 12 nations, China starts with 8. China starts with a natural disadvantage. Finally we had 11 and they had 7. But then this out-of-the-box approach helps. Reaching out. So what is needed today, which we are pursuing, is foreign policy in a very out-of-the-box manner. Very, very innovative manner, different way approaching to issues. In this, many aspects become our tools. There was this discussion about soft power, coined by someone called Joseph Nye. He was there last month in a conference in Delhi. I was also incidentally there. No, this whole software thinking doesn't go beyond song and dance. So what are our soft power tools? Shah Rukh Khan. That of Bharatanatyam. So the result is you have an ICCR which has an empaneled list of artists, some 10 Kathak, 5 Bharatanatyam, 4 Odissi. In the name of software, you keep sending them to all countries. Jabardasti. Those people don't want them. But then there is, you have to accept this cultural troupe visiting which country? This cultural troupe is visiting Sydney. What are they going to do there? It's a Odissi troupe. In Australia, there are hardly any Orias. No, so this whole approach of soft power is not limited to certain cultural forms alone. Culture itself is a very big area, very vast area. But our education can be of soft power. We have education advantage in India, but we have never looked at it as a soft power tool. I was in Mongolia for some conference again. I went to meet top 4 Buddhist, there are 4 Buddhist orders there. I went to meet all the 4 Buddhist clerics, top clerics. 3 of them spoke with me in fluent Hindi. I was surprised. I asked them, where did you learn? They said, every Buddhist in Mongolia goes to India to have basic learning about Buddhism. And their figures, I may be wrong, their figure was 50,000 people every year come to India to join these monasteries in Uttaranchal or Ladakh to study Buddhism. In the process, they also learn about your languages, your culture, your lifestyle, your food. There are 6 Indian restaurants in Ulaanbaatar, small city. So, education can be a very effective tool. But we have never looked at it that way. Manipal University wants to go and set up institution in some other country, or HRD ministry will immediately ask you how much money you will get out of it. So why should we allow you to earn those foreign dollars? I won't give you permission. Baba, let them earn dollars. But in the process, you are catching hold of 50 bright students in so-and-so country. Diplomacy is about so many things. It's not just about agreements. It's about penetrating the societies. It's about influencing the policies in those governments. How do you do that? Mongolia had a foreign minister who studied in Indian law school in Bangalore. As long as he was there, he lost in the last election. But as long as he was there, he would happily help India. So, education can be a foreign policy, diplomatic tool. Religion can of course be. I don't know how many of you know, because I mentioned about Mongolia. P.V. Narasimha Rao, as Prime Minister, decided to send a Buddhist monk by name Kushak Bakula as ambassador to Mongolia. Mongolia became free from the USSR control in 1991. 1993, the probably first or second diplomat from India to go was not an IFS officer. I have nothing against IFS officers. There are good officers sitting there in Mongolia. They are doing a wonderful job. But one of the first officers to go was a non-IFS Buddhist monk by name Kushak Bakula. He stayed there for 6 years. If you go to Mongolia today, every practicing Buddhist, most of them will have Lord Buddha's photo along with that Kushak Bakula's photo. So much respect for India, so much respect for our country, but through religion. It's possible. So these other, our academics, our spiritual leaders, our technology, there was a mention about technology. How technology can be used as a diplomatic tool. So certain innovative ways we have to think about, and we have to use number of these things as our diplomatic tools, diplomatic weapons. So much so that I suggested that this whole complaint. Pakistan is starting madrasas all along the Indo-Nepalese border. Regularly we get IV reports. That is where these so-called anti-national training and all is given to certain youngsters. unknown names. They don't know what they are doing. This training is given. I just jokingly suggested, why not we start madrasas along Indo-Nepalese border? You teach different things there. You run madrasa. You teach different things there. So you have to think innovatively. You have to think out of the box. You have to find. That's why I insist that probably we have to find certain unconventional answers to conventional issues. You need Sri Lanka to fall in line. Sri Lanka was becoming too close to China. What do? You need to think of unconventional answers. Conventional answer is go talk to him, threaten him. You can do that. One officer told me, sir, if he doesn't listen, I will show him the world map. If you show him the world map, India is smaller. You can show him. This is the conventional approach we have been practicing, I tell you. This is not just a joke. We would threaten leaders of small countries. But can there be unconventional ways which will get you the conventional result? You want peace with Pakistan. Can there be an unconventional way of achieving it? One has to think about it. I don't spell out things here because they have to remain like that for some time. I can give you one very classic example. Japan was practically destroyed in 1945. Everybody knows. 2 atom bombs were dropped on that country. Who dropped those atom bombs? America. But do we know that in 1949, Japan joined NATO? A grouping of the countries which is led by that very same power which was responsible for that whole great destruction 4 years ago. How can you explain that? I mean, it should have been a lifelong enmity. A lifelong means what? Perennial. I mean, unending enmity with America. But Japan, in its own wisdom, decided that it is too powerful fellows. Why not we hand over our entire security to these fellows? Let them take care of my security. I will take care of my development. Good thing for Japan was Japan could concentrate completely on its development, on its education, on its infrastructure and development, forgetting about its security, because its security is taken care of by that NATO arrangement. America is taking care of your security. When I give this example, you may feel that yes, India should also do something like that. My proposition is, India should look for Japans. India should not become Japan. India should look for Japan. There are so many Japans available in the world. Look for them. I hope as international relations students you understand what I mean. So there are ways of, it has to be now unconventional. We have to go beyond these conventional practices. We have an immediate issue. I don't take much of your time anymore. We have an immediate issue with our neighbors. Especially with countries like China. We are approaching this issue from a slightly different perspective. Now, the direct approach is to talk to them and find a solution to the border problem, which has to happen one day. But there is this very famous Chinese scholar called Sun Tzu, who authored a very famous book called The Art of War. In that Art of War, he says that countries should not have single objectives, have multiple targets, not one, multiple targets. The whole mindset has to change. This whole either-or approach. Either you solve a border problem or nothing. From here, shift to and also approach. Yes, there is a border problem, we handle it. But 5 other targets you set. When handling this border problem with all firmness, all steps that you need to take. That includes talking to them about finding a solution to this vexed issue, but also strengthening our border infrastructure, which we are doing now. India has great plans to strengthen its border infrastructure in a big way. In the next 5 years, you will see Indian borders along the Indo-Tibetan border getting new roads, getting new communication systems, getting schools, getting hospitals, getting electricity, getting airports, getting railways. But then there are other objectives on which we can engage with China. For example, we have what we normally describe as Pak-occupied Kashmir. POK is two parts, not one part. Part of it is called by Pakistan as Azad Kashmir, and it is an 8th province. It has the government, it has a chief minister and all that. The remaining half, the northern provinces, which they call as Gilgit and Baltistan, are centrally administered terrain. There is a representative of the level of joint secretary or sometimes deputy secretary who runs the affairs of that part of the country. Now there is a huge Chinese presence there. And you must remember, Gilgit-Baltistan is our gateway to Central Asia. Can we think of it? Central Asia is very crucial. Can our leaders visit Central Asia? So when you deal with your neighbors, set multiple targets. That is how you bring people to certain tangible, understanding. So friends, a new approach, basically what I am trying to say is, a new approach to solving the same old problems. That is what the government of Prime Minister Modi is attempting. He has travelled extensively in the last 6 months, and the coming 6 months also the calendar is very full. He is visiting number of countries. He is going to Sri Lanka, he is going to Germany, he is going to many other countries. And you will see a very dynamic foreign policy oriented approach evolving in the next few months, and by the end of this year, India will have a totally different foreign policy approach, and the result of which you will find India to be at a totally different level in the international arena. We will reach a totally different level. That is the whole objective of this new approach. In the process, sometimes some brickbats also have to be accepted. So suddenly you may have to change the foreign secretary. People will criticize, why do you do that? How can you should explain? People who have changed foreign secretaries in press conferences, they are asking, no, you should explain. People have given promotions unduly. 15 officers were superseded to make somebody foreign secretary. They are now asking, why do you do this? How can you do that? There is a purpose. There is a reason. It's nothing against any individual. But keeping the India's foreign policy objectives in mind, certain changes are needed. The government is effecting those changes. It is in the greater interest of our country, our diplomacy, our foreign policy and foreign international relations. Friends, thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and I hope to see you.
Thank you, Ram, for a very brilliant presentation of a new approach in foreign policy. We are a 1.26 billion country, the third biggest economy on the globe in purchasing power parity. But this consciousness sometimes is not really penetrated into aspects of policy, because the kind of bureaucratic culture we have is still a colonial culture, in which we are still almost a colony. And the thinking is the Indian people are different from the government. The government is ruling the Indian people. When it's not a partnership, but the government is ruling the Indian people. So that Chinese wall between the government and the people and this perception that we are still a colonized country. These are Chinese walls that are now rapidly being torn down, and one of the key architects behind that tearing down process is now here with you. I think we'll all agree that it was an excellent presentation of the realities of the situation that's emerging. I want to thank you, Ram, for coming here, and now I'd like to... Oh, one of them. I thought it was very good, excellent.
So, I think as he has been the proponent of being under the out-of-box thinking, now he has agreed to answer a few of the questions. I think around 10 minutes we have. Any of you have any questions, please interact with him.
Either we are fully convinced or totally not convinced at all. There will be two reasons for not.
No, I just want to ask you, I mean, after all the students here, you're going to be basically practitioners of foreign policy in the future. In Manipal, we are very clear to it. We want an India-centric approach to our international relations. So, I think this is important to hear Mr. Ram Madhav discuss this whole question of, because the whole basis of foreign policy is India-centric. That if we make a foreign policy that suits us as a country, as a people, and in that process suits others also, because essentially we've got to suit others also if we want to make them partners. So I think I'm sure there will be at least 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sir, I'm Anand, PhD candidate at the Department of Geopolitics. My question is India's, the new Indian government's foreign policy on Central Asia, will it be rooted through Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or will it be through just bilaterally or multilaterally with the 5 stars? Thank you.
I think I have already answered. In all these things, there need not be an either-or approach. It can be and also approach. We do this and we do that also.
May I?
Please.
Sir, I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation and agreed to almost all the points that you made. But one point of slight difference, that is in Japan. One of the reasons why Japan prospered under American protection is because they had an industrial revolution much before the war, and they had that talent, that scientific base to promote their efforts. But the fact remains that they continue to be under American occupation. Even now, colonies for American troops are there on that territory. The Japanese constitution was approved by the American president and only, and even now they're finding it so difficult to implement. So they have their own compulsion to do whatever they do. There's a slight difference.
In fact, I totally agree with you. That's why I said we should not see Japan as an example. We should look for Japans that suit India. I thought you are okay with it. I am not saying India should become Japan, but India should look for Japan. How America could fight one Japan, can India also fight some Japan somewhere? That was the point I was making.
I also couldn't agree more with whatever you say, Ram Madhav. But I have one point to suggest to you. This Delhi is a den of old fossilized laws, which these Congress fellows have run for 60 years. And though you have thrown them off politically, but these individuals who flourished on them, who lived on the fat of the land, they continue. You see them on the television, you see them on the media. You had such a great visit, Obama, but I went to television. I found 4 out of 5. China क्या सोचेगा, पाकिस्तान क्या सोचेगा? I said, bloody hell, पैसे हमारे खर्च हो रहे हैं, आप उनकी चिंता कर रहे हो? They have such a lot of this Trojan fellows, tattoos clearly, but they're dominating our capital. You must be wary of them, I feel, because they when you talk of, people का पेड़ लगाने, अरे कुछ बात गड़बड़, I said, anything which you do, they have questions, and they have nothing to add to our country's strength. They always hit at our strength. Now, unless we should at some point look at them and contend with them. They are turned courts who till yesterday were lashing out and now suddenly they have turned turtle and now they are doing this. We should be wary of them. This is Chanakya who said that be wary of Buddhimano vi varam shatru na murkho ekata. I mean, so I just want to submit to you because I feel very strongly about what you are saying. And